She's only 7, her real dad gone. Forever fallen in a war he never walked. Away from her mom lying in a hospital bed barely breathing, and the man she was forced to call dad he tied her puppy to a pole in the freezing snow and left like that little life meant nothing. Now she's alone, she's scared, and all she had was that puppy, but she didn't run. She didn't break, she chose to fight. If you believe in kindness, in love, in the strength of one small heart, watch her story, support her fight, let her know she's not alone anymore. Comment her name, Nora, to show the world she matters. Every name written is a hand reaching out to hold hers. In Willow Ridge winter came early and stayed long. The snow didn't fall like flakes, it fell like silence. Streets narrowed, chimneys smoked, and the world seemed to hush itself under layers of white. People in this town walked slower in winter, bundled in thick coats and knitted hats, speaking in warm whispers as if not to disturb the snow. Nora Jensen had turned 7 2 months ago. She was a small, quiet child with large grey-blue eyes, in a habit of folding her hands when nervous. Her dark brown hair curled just slightly at the ends, and she wore the same purple jacket every day. Even when she was indoors, she rarely laughed, not because she had forgotten how, but because the house had grown quieter since her 4th birthday. That was the year her father died. Ethan Jensen had been a Marine, tall, broad, soft-spoken, a man who smelled of pine and coffee and kissed his daughter's forehead every night without fail. He was deployed for his final mission just days after Nora turned 4. He sent a postcard from Kuwait. Then a week later there was a knock on the door and a flag and silence. Nora didn't remember the funeral, but she remembered the hug that came after, the way her mother stopped singing, the way people looked at her as if she were breakable. Emily Jensen, Nora's mother, was a florist by trade and a mother by everything else. 36 years old, with auburn hair and tired green eyes. She was kind, thoughtful, and protective. She kept things neat, bills paid, Nora's mittens sewn tight, but she was slower now, weighed down by headaches she didn't talk about and fears she didn't name. She didn't date, not for years, not until Greg Holloway. Greg had served with Ethan. He was in his early 40s, tall and lean, with weather-worn skin and steel-gray eyes. When he came to Willow Ridge after Ethan's funeral, he spoke softly, respectfully, offering to help around the house. He fixed the porch steps, shoveled the walkway, told stories about Ethan that made Emily laugh through her tears. He was gentle, thoughtful, patient, at least at first. 3 months before Nora's 7th birthday he moved in. Now it had been a year to the neighbors. Greg was dependable, a war buddy, keeping a promise. He held Emily's hand in church, smiled at the baker, shook hands at the grocery store. When Emily was around, he treated Nora like spun glass, always gentle, always smiling, always calling her kiddo. But when her mother left the room, Greg's face changed. His words shortened, his voice hardened. Sometimes he muttered under his breath, calling her clingy or ungrateful. Once, when she accidentally spilled orange juice on the kitchen floor, he grabbed her arm, not hard enough to bruise, but just enough to scare. Nora never told her mother. She knew Emily loved him, and Emily already had too much to worry about, headaches that made her press a hand to her temples, dizzy spells. She called just fatigue. Nora learned to live quietly, to stay out of Greg's way, to spend more time outside near the big pine tree in the backyard. That tree had been her and her father's special place. They used to sit beneath it folding little paper stars from scraps of mail, and stringing them along the branches. If I'm ever far away, Ethan once told her, hang a star and I'll find my way back to it. She hadn't added any new ones since the day he died, but she still stood under the tree sometimes and whispered. One early December morning after the first heavy snow, the town of Willow Ridge prepared for the holidays. Window displays of fake snowflakes, canned carols playing through shop speakers. Emily was in bed, a headache keeping her from work. Greg had left early, saying something about the hardware store. Nora was reading on the porch steps when she saw a figure approaching through the snow. Lucas Rivera was a stranger to most of Willow Ridge, but not to Nora. She remembered him faintly from her father's funeral, a wiry man in his late 30s with a short beard, brown skin, and a limp his left leg. His eyes were kind, worn down by things he didn't talk about. He carried a large cardboard box wrapped in brown paper and tied with twine, with small holes punched in the sides. Steam rose faintly from it in the cold air. Emily greeted him with surprise, hugging him tightly. You came all this way, she whispered. Had to. Lucas said I made a promise. They stepped inside. Nora hovered near the wall, unsure. Lucas turned to her, kneeling to her height. I've got something for you, he said, and opened the box. Inside, wrapped in soft fleece and nestled against a warm pack, was a golden retriever puppy, barely a month old. Its fur was pale gold, its eyes not fully focused, its small tail wagging sleepily. It gave a tiny yawn, then blinked up at Nora as if it had always belonged to her. Nora's breath caught. Lucas smiled. Your dad made me promise if anything happened, I was to find the sunniest little puppy I could and bring it to you. He said you needed someone who'd always wait at the door. Nora reached into the box with slow hands. The puppy leaned into her palm, warm and trembling. I'll call him Sunny, she said, barely above a whisper. Greg returned just as Lucas was sipping tea in the kitchen. His eyes flicked to the puppy, then to Nora, then to Emily. A dog, he said flatly. Emily smiled, tired but bright. It's from Ethan. Said nothing, just nodded once, but later, when Emily wasn't looking, Nora saw him staring not at her, at Sunny. His jaw was tight, his eyes colder than the snow outside. That night Nora laid curled beside Sunny's little bed, her hand resting on his soft side. Emily sat nearby, pressing a cool cloth to her forehead. Outside, the pine tree swayed in the wind. A single faded star still hung from its lowest branch. Nora looked toward the window. Daddy, she whispered. I remembered, and with Sunny snuggled at her side, she fell into the deepest sleep she'd had in 3 winters. The snow deepened in Willow Ridge. It coated the rooftops like icing and clung to bare branches like memory. The cold turned harsh overnight, and the wind howled through the narrow alleys between houses, rattling shutters and whispering things best left unsaid. Christmas lights blinked dully behind frost-covered windows, but inside the Jensen home no warmth remained. It happened on a Monday morning. Emily had bundled up early to run to the market, scarf wound tightly around her pale face, cheeks flushed from the wind. Nora had kissed her goodbye at the door, Sunny tucked under one arm like a bundle of light. It had snowed heavily the night before, and the roads were slick. Emily's headaches had been worse the past few days, her steps slower, her voice softer. She had brushed it off with a strange smile. Greg was in the kitchen, pretending not to notice her sway. She never made it to the store. Half an hour later, sirens echoed down Main Street. A car had skidded on the black ice near the library, turn crashed into a concrete lamp post. The windshield shattered, the front bumper folded like paper. A bag of groceries had burst open on the snow. Apples, a loaf of bread, a jar of strawberry jam. Emily was unconscious when they pulled her from the wreck at the hospital. A nurse called it what it was, a brain hemorrhage, possibly triggered by a pre-existing condition. She slipped into a coma within hours. The doctors said they couldn't predict how long it would last. That night the house changed. Greg returned from the hospital with snow still clinging to his boots. He didn't speak. He hung his coat slowly, as if every movement required effort. Nora stood in the hallway with Sunny in her arms, her small eyes wide and blinking, waiting for something. Comfort, a hug, a promise. Anything. You need to stop crying, Greg said. She's not dead. Then he walked past her into the living room and turned on the television. The man who once smiled when Emily looked was gone. What remained was sharpness, edges, mutters, and slamming doors. Greg's patience wore thinner by the hour. He stopped pretending when Nora asked to visit the hospital. He said it was too far, too dangerous, too cold. When she offered to help make dinner, he waved her off with a grunt. Son, once allowed to nap by the fireplace, was now banished to the old shed behind the house. No dogs in the house, Greg barked. It's a mutt, not a baby. Nora didn't argue. She wrapped Sunny in a blanket and snuck him scraps of food at night. She whispered to him in the dark, told him about her dreams in the old pine tree, about the snowflakes she used to catch with her tongue before everything turned quiet. A week passed. One afternoon, searching for paper to draw on, Nora climbed into the attic, a small cramped space above the kitchen filled with dusty boxes and forgotten shelves. The air smelled like old books and cedar as she shuffled through a box labeled Zmas. Her hand brushed something wrapped in a faded navy cloth. It was a wooden box, small and heavy, with a rusted latch. Inside were letters, dozens of them, folded carefully, tied with green string. Each one was marked 2M in a handwriting she knew well, her father's. They were from Afghanistan, dated across 2 years. She flipped through them slowly, fingers trembling, afraid to breathe. One envelope sat at the bottom, sealed on the back, her name, for Nora. When she's ready. She didn't open it, not yet. She tucked it back beneath the others like a prayer, waiting for the right moment. Meanwhile, across the snowy fence, someone was watching. Marley Granger, age 29, lived alone in the blue-shuttered cottage next door. A local journalist who worked for the Willow Ridge Gazette. Marley was tall, narrow-faced, with warm hazel eyes and a perpetual air of thoughtful observation. She wore oversized sweaters, drank tea by the gallon, and had a habit of scribbling in her notebook at odd hours. She had grown up in a louder part of the state, but moved to Willow Ridge after a messy breakup and her younger sister's death. In a car crash it made her quiet, cautious but fiercely empathetic. She noticed things, especially children. That week she began noticing Nor. It started with the silence. The porch swing stopped moving. No more laughter, no snow angels in the yard. She saw Nora out back one night, kneeling near the shed, trying to drag a blanket through the snow. A flash of golden fur, a soft bark. The girl was crying, but made no sound. Marley stood behind her, curtain hand frozen on her teacup. The next day she tried to greet Greg as he shoveled the walk, but he gave only a curt nod and returned inside. When she called out to Nora from the fence, the girl waved barely. Her eyes darted toward the window, then she disappeared. Marley's gut tightened. Something wasn't right. She began writing things down, times, dates, weather details. A journalist by trade, but a woman of instinct, she decided to keep watch back. Inside the yellow house, Nora sat beside Sunny in the laundry room, her new hiding place. She traced her fingers along the edge of the sealed letter, still unread. She wanted to open it, but something inside her whispered, not yet. That night, Greg slammed a cupboard and cursed when the power flickered. Snow fell harder. The wind pushed against the windows like it wanted in, and somewhere in the darkness, the paper stars on the pine tree swayed gently, as if remembering a father who once promised, if you hang a star I'll find my way home. The snow had turned to ice by morning. A thin sleet hissed against the windows of the Jensen house, falling slantwise in sheets that blurred the sky and smudged the world into a mess of gray. The cold was sharper now, meaner. It bit into the wood of the porch and groaned in the old hinges of the back shed where Sunny had been confined. For 4 nights straight Nora hadn't spoken aloud since her mother's accident. Not to Greg, not at school where she now rarely went. She stayed inside most days, curled beside the laundry vent with Sunny during the hours Greg was out. But today he hadn't left, and worse, his temper was waiting for something to burn. Greg Holloway had been pacing since breakfast, shoulders stiff beneath his flannel shirt. He hadn't shaved in days, and his pale eyes were ringed with a dull red tiredness. His patience, already thin, snapped completely when he found paw prints on the living room rug. I told you, he growled, his voice low, dangerous. No dogs inside. Nora flinched but didn't move. Sunny, as if sensing the storm, slinked behind her legs. I said, outside. Greg grabbed the puppy by the scruff, ignoring Nora's protests, and stormed out into this. Nora ran after him, coat half zipped, boots untied, her breath puffing out in frantic clouds. They passed through the back gate and into the empty street. Greg marched straight to the park, silent, frozen, its swings stiff with frost, and stopped at a maple tree near the edge of the woods. He pulled a worn rope from his jacket pocket, looped it roughly around Sunny's neck, and tied it to the tree's trunk. There, he muttered, let him freeze with the rest of your lies. Nora screamed. It wasn't loud, it was a small, broken sound like glass cracking beneath pressure. Her fingers reached for Sunny, but Greg turned and pointed a finger at her face, twisted. You say a word to anyone, and I'll send him to the pound. You think anyone's going to take in a mutt like that in this weather? Then he walked away back through the snowstorm, Without looking back, Sonny whimpered. Against the tree he was shaking ears. Flat eyes wide with confusion. Nora stayed only long enough to wait until Greg was out of sight, then ran to him, tugging at the knot with frozen fingers. The rope wouldn't budge. Her coat was thin, her gloves damp from the snow. She wrapped herself around the puppy, trying to warm him with her own small body, but the cold was too much. Her vision blurred. Her breath came shorter, and finally her arms blackened around Sonny as her head drooped onto the frozen ground across the street. Inside the blue-shuttered cottage, Marley Granger was washing dishes when she noticed something out of place, a shape by the tree in the park. She squinted through the window, heart quickening. She threw on her long beige trench coat, still half-buttoned, and ran across the icy road, boots crunching against the frozen path. Her breath caught when she reached the tree. Nora lay curled on the ground, arms wrapped around the small, trembling body of a golden retriever. Both were half covered in sleet, barely moving. Hey, hey! Marley dropped to her knees, her voice shaking. Nora, sweetheart, can you hear me? She pulled her scarf off and wrapped it around the girl. Sonny gave a weak bark. Marley picked up Nora, who was frighteningly light, and tucked the puppy into her coat. She hurried back toward her house, slipping once on the ice but refusing to fall. Inside, the warmth hit like sunlight. Marley placed Nora on the couch and grabbed blankets from the linen closet. Sonny, nestled in a towel, was placed on a heating pad by the fire. She called her old neighbor, Mrs. Dell, a retired nurse who lived 2 blocks over, a heavy-set woman with sharp eyes and steady hands, always in wool cardigans and knitted caps, who had once helped deliver a baby in a snowstorm. She came immediately, no questions asked. She's hypothermic, Mrs. Dell muttered, pressing a hand to Nora's forehead, but check come around you did good. Marley didn't respond. She was staring at Nora's hands, still slightly curled, as if she were protecting something invisible. Later, once Nora was resting under 3 layers of blankets, Marley sat at her small writing desk by the window and stared at the park across the way. On the wall beside her desk hung a photo, black and white, slightly faded, of a young woman in army fatigues grinning in the desert sun. Her name was Sarah Granger, Marley's older sister, a field nurse in Afghanistan. She had saved 27 lives before losing her own in a roadside explosion. She was supposed to come home that Christmas. Marley never stopped feeling like Sarah's voice had gone unfinished. That's what she saw in Nora now, a small voice, buried and quiet, waiting for someone to listen. She pulled out a notebook, a soft leather-bound thing with lined pages and a ribbon marker. The first page was blank. She began writing. December 12th, girl found near the M tree. Severe cold, puppy nearly dead, witness no adult with her claims not made yet. Possible abuse or neglect, need to investigate further. She paused, tapping her pen. Greg Holloway, former Marine, lived with Emily Jensen for 1 year. Temper issues, look into history. Emily Jensen hospitalized, coma, no father present, only guardian. Hollow away. Sonny whine from his blanket. Marley rose to stroke his fur gently. He was small too small for a winter like this. His nose was dry, his paws pink from exposure. She crouched beside him. Don't worry, she whispered, "I'll keep her safe." When Nora woke hours later, Marley was beside her, with a warm mug of cocoa and no questions, not yet, just silence safe. Silence the kind that let a child's eyes blink without fear. That night snow continued to fall on Willow Ridge. The maple tree stood silent and slick with ice, unaware of the scene it had just held, and in Marley's small living room a girl and her dog slept side by side, beneath a quilt stitched with pine needles, stars, and a sky neither of them could yet name. 2 days after the night by the maple tree, the snow began to melt at the edges, not much, just enough for footprints to smear at the park's edge, just enough for the icicles on porch eaves to drip like slow clocks. But it was a change, and in Willow Ridge even a shift in wind could mean something was about to break open. Nora hadn't returned home since that night she stayed at Marley Granger's house on the quiet authority of Mrs. Dell, the retired nurse, who now stood firm in the town as something of an unofficial guardian for lost causes. Mrs. Dell, with her weathered cheeks and steel-grey curls, had spoken plainly to Greg Holloway when he came pounding on Marley's door 2 mornings ago. "She's not well," she said, hands on her broad hips. "You get her back when she's warm-fed and strong enough to speak without shaking." Greg had scoffed. "That kid's a liar," he snapped. "She probably ran off and tied the mutt to that tree herself. Craves attention, always has Marley watching from behind." Mrs. Dell had said nothing, just narrowed her eyes and made a mental note. Later that day Greg filed a statement with the local police, nothing formal, just a concern that Nora was behaving erratically, that she had fabricated at the entire incident, that she was unstable, and that the dog had bitten him once months ago. He suggested Sunny be removed for everyone's safety. Words spread slowly, as it always did in Willow Ridge, by whispers in the bakery line, by sideways glances at the hardware store. Most people didn't say much, but enough had seen Nora, quiet, careful Nora, to question the story. Marley didn't wait for rumors. That night, after Nora fell asleep curled next to Sunny on the sea couch, Marley pulled out her laptop. The soft glow of the screen lit up her face. Now more determined than cautious, she sipped cold tea and typed Greg's name into an old military database she still had access to through an old contact. Daniel Ross, a former investigative journalist turned VA coordinator who owed her a favor. Greg Holloway, former U.S. Marine Honorable Discharge Awards, 2 deployments, but buried deep in the digital pages was a disciplinary note. Command reassignment following tactical misjudgment resulting in the death of CPL Ethan Jensen. Official finding lack of communication and protocol breach. Reprimand issued, rank demoted before discharge. There it was in simple, sanitized words. Greg had made a mistake, and Ethan had died because of it. Marley stared at the screen for a long time. Then she wrote it down in her journal. Greg had built a life in Willow Bridge on the ashes of someone else's sacrifice, and now he was trying to erase the only person left who still remembered the man he'd betrayed. The next morning she made a call. Lucas Rivera arrived on a Tuesday train. He hadn't intended to return. He'd sworn he wouldn't, but when Marley had called him voice low and urgent he. Listened Lucas wore the same brown leather jacket as before though it was older now more cracked at the seams he carried a small duffel and walked with a slight limp the consequence of shrapnel and his eyes once soft with grief now held a harder edge they met at Samie's Diner, the only place in Willow Ridge that still served hot food past 6 p.m. Samie herself, a broad-shouldered woman in her 60s with a loud laugh and thick black hair pulled into a bun, greeted them both with familiarity and mild curiosity. She brought coffee, didn't ask questions. Marley slid the printout of the military reprimand across the table. Lucas didn't flinch. I knew it, he muttered. Why didn't you say anything before? Marley asked. Lucas rubbed his temple. Because I was warned not to. I tried to speak up after the court martial hearing, but I was told if I pushed it, if I made it public, I'd risk losing my VA benefits, medical care, housing, everything. He looked away for a long moment, then back. But I made a promise to Ethan, and now seeing what that bastard is doing to Nora. He pulled out his notebook. Tell me where to start. I'll write it all down, everything I saw that day, every order. Greg ignored. Marley nodded, silent with gratitude. She watched as Lucas's pen moved across the page, not neat, not quick, but certain. Later, as snow began to fall again, she walked Lucas back to the house. They paused outside Marley's garden gate, where the porch light cast a halo on the fresh dusting of white cheese. Like him, you know, Lucas said. Nora, she looks like Ethan, sure, but it's more than that. She's quiet, but not because she's scared. She's thinking, always watching. She's more than most adults give her credit for. Marley replied. He nodded. That's why Greg can't control her. She doesn't buy the ACT inside the house. Nora stirred beneath her quilt. Sonny lifted his head as the door opened and Marley stepped in. I saw him today, Nora whispered. Marley crouched beside her. Greg? Nora nodded. He was watching from the corner store. He didn't say anything, just stared. Marley took her hand. He's not going to hurt you again, I promise. That night, Marley added one more line to her journal. Lucas Rivera, witness Ethan Jensen, Silent by protocol. Nora Jensen, the voice that remains outside. Snow gathered on the fence line, and in a quiet house where two small lives slept side by side, a woman who had once lost her sister finally felt like she was helping someone stay alive. The snow had turned to slush in Willow Ridge. It soaked the earth with a quiet persistence, heavy and gray, a tired kind of cold. Puddles formed in potholes. The edges of the sidewalk softened, and the wind no longer carried bite but suspicion, the kind that drifted in behind closed doors and whispered in the corners of warm kitchens inside Marley Granger's home. Nora Jensen sat at the kitchen table with a steaming cup of cocoa between her hands. Her sleeves were pulled down over her palms, her shoulders hunched forward like she was trying to fold herself smaller, but her eyes, those steady gray-blue eyes, stared straight ahead, watchful. It had been a week since Lucas Rivera returned and gave his statement, a week since Greg's version of events began to unravel. The town was still quiet, but not comfortably so. Neighbors glanced a little longer. Conversation stuttered. The story was unfolding, and Willa didn't quite know what to do with the truth that morning. while Marley had gone to meet her editor. At the regional office Nora stayed, behind with Mrs. Dell, the retired nurse. With a sharp mind and soft hands, Dell had a way of moving through a house as if it were hers, tidying here, heating soup there. She hummed echons under her breath and wore her late husband's cardigan with mismatched buttons sewn on by her granddaughter while Dee reheated lunch. Nora wandered into the hallway and looked up at the ceiling. The attic hatch sat slightly ajar. Odd, because Marley was meticulous. Nora dragged a chair beneath it and climbed carefully. The ladder groaned but held. The attic was dim-lined with old Christmas decorations, stacks of newspapers, and a single-seater trunk pushed beneath the eaves. Nora walked to the far end toward a pile of boxes she had seen once before. Her fingers brushed over a familiar wooden one, its edges worn smooth with time. She opened it slowly. There were the letters again, her father's letters to her mother, all tied with green string. She had read the names, the dates, the steady SOW of a man trying to bridge continents with ink, but this time she reached for the envelope at the bottom, the one marked in careful print for Nora when she's ready. Her hands shook slightly as she opened it. Inside was a single page folded 3 times. The paper smelled faintly of sand and old tobacco. The writing was neat but rushed. Sweetheart, if you're reading this, it means I didn't make it home. I wish I could have told you this in person, but war doesn't always wait for goodbyes. I want you to know something. I didn't go because I didn't love you. I went because I did. If I'm not there to keep you safe, I need you to find someone who can, someone kind, someone who protects, not controls. Trust your heart, Nora. It's a better judge than most grown-ups, and remember, some wolves wear sheep's clothing. Love you forever, Daddy. Nora read the letter twice, then she folded it, placed it in her coat pocket, and climbed down the ladder. She didn't cry. Instead, she asked Mrs. Dell for a pen. That afternoon, Marley returned home and found a drawing on her desk, a single star with a note beneath it in Nora's handwriting. I think I'm ready now, but danger was already approaching. That night, when the sun slipped beneath the icy clouds, Greg Holloway parked 2 blocks away from Marley's house and walked the rest of the way on foot. He wore a dark hoodie, gloves, and a baseball ball cap pulled low. The town had grown suspicious of him, but suspicion wasn't enough. He needed control again. Marley had installed a camera outside her front door 2 days ago. It was small, tucked beneath the porch light. Greg didn't notice it. He circled the house, found the back door. It wasn't locked. Inside, the house was quiet. Nora was asleep on the sofa, Sunny curled against her feet. Marley was in her office, editing the final draft of an article titled "The Serve Driver Who Lied When Heroism Hides Harm." Greg moved through the kitchen, silently checking drawers, cabinets, the hallway. He took down a photo from the fridge, one of Nora and her mother beside the pine tree, and crumpled it into his coat pocket. But as he stepped into the hallway, a low growl stopped him. Sunny stood there, eyes locked on Greg, body low and tense. Greg froze. His hand twitched toward his belt, but a voice rang out from the hallway above Greg. Marley stood on the stairs, holding her phone, recording. "What are you doing in my house?" Greg didn't answer. He turned, moved fast toward the door, but the damage was done. The footage from the porch camera, the audio from her phone, the scratches Sonny left on his sleeve as he brushed past. The evidence was enough. The next morning, a social worker named Karen Whitmore arrived. She was in her early 50s with short silver hair, a pressed navy coat, and the composed manner of someone who had seen too much and pretended not to. She sat across from Nora at Marley's kitchen table, hands folded, voice gentle. "Nora, I know this is a lot, but we need to know what happened. Your voice matters. Now you won't be punished. You're safe." Here Nora looked at her, then at Marley, then at Sonny, and for the first time in public she spoke. "My dad once told me," she said softly, "that some wolves wear sheep's clothing. I didn't understand what that meant until now." She reached into her coat and slid the letter onto the table. Karen read it slowly, her brow tightening. "We'll take it from here," she said that evening as the sun dipped behind the rooftops of Willow Ridge. Marley hit submit on her article. The headline read, "The true survivor is the one who speaks." The byline was hers, but the voice behind every word belonged to a little girl who had found her courage in the attic, folded in a letter from a father who never came home but never truly left. The wind in Willow Ridge had a way of shifting without warning. It was subtle, a turn of chill against the neck, the hush of pine branches outside the hospital window. On the third Wednesday of January the air smelled different, like thawing earth and old truths rising with it. Inside Street Agatha Regional Hospital, the monitors near room 214 beeped steadily until they didn't. Emily Jensen's eyes opened. She blinked slowly, as if waking from underwater. The ceiling was unfamiliar, bright panels, a humming light, soft walls. Her throat was dry, her limbs heavy, and then a name formed in her chest before her lips could shape it. Nora beside her bed, a nurse, a soft-spoken woman in her 40s named Tamara, with round glasses and the calm eyes of someone who had held too many hands through too many long nights. Leaned in and smiled. "You're awake, just breathe, honey, you've been asleep for a while." Emily tried to sit up. Her heart raced, images flickered, snow, dizziness, a blur of red and white. Her daughter's face. "Where's Nora?" "She's safe," Tamara said gently. "She's with a friend of yours, Marley Granger, and your daughter. She's been incredibly brave." Emily's breath caught, her fingers curled around the edge of the blanket. "I need to see her." Tamara gave a soft nod. "We'll call her, but first the doctor needs to speak with you." An hour later, once Emily had been cleared for short visits and her speech had steadied, Marley entered the room, coat dusted with snow, eyes red but clear, a folder clutched under one arm. She didn't speak at first. She just walked to the bedside and reached for Emily's hand. "I'm sorry," Marley whispered. "I should have come to you sooner." "What happened?" Emily asked. "I remember Greg, the market, then everything went dark." Marley pulled up a chair. "You need to know everything about Nora, about Greg, and about Ethan." It took an hour to explain. She started with the maple tree where Nora was found, holding Sonny barely conscious in the snow. She explained the lies Greg told the police, the threats he made, the files she uncovered from his military record. She spoke of Lucas's return, the statement he gave. She handed Emily a copy of the letter Ethan had written, the one meant for Nora, found in a box beneath the attic, and she told her what Nora had said in front of the social worker. My dad once told me that some wolves wear sheep's clothing. By the end of it, Emily's hands were shaking. She couldn't speak. She simply reached for the letter and unfolded it, tears rising. Before she read a word, Tamara entered with water and quietly set it down, offering Marley a glance that asked, "Should I stay?" Marley gave a small nod. Emily read slowly each line from Ethan, struck like a chisel to ice. "If I'm not there to keep you safe, I need you to find someone who can, someone kind, someone who protects, not controls." She pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Then finally she asked, "Where is Greg?" Marley's voice was steady. "He came into my house looking for Nora. We caught him on camera with everything else we've gathered. He's being charged child endangerment, animal cruelty, and falsifying military records." Emily nodded, as if her spine mind had finally straightened beneath the weight of it. "All I believed in him. I thought if he was broken I could help fix it. Sometimes," Marley said, "the cracks go deeper than we can reach." That evening Lucas Rivera visited the hospital. He was wearing a clean shirt, his boots polished, but the same leather jacket hung loose around his shoulders. He brought with him a small envelope. "She should have this," he said. It was a second letter from Ethan meant for Emily. Lucas had known if he should deliver it. Until now, Emily opened it with trembling fingers. "If I don't make it home, please forgive me, not for going but for leaving you alone. You were the best part of my life. Don't shut the door to love, but promise me this. Don't give Nora to just anyone. Let someone earn it. Don't let grief make you desperate. You're stronger than the loneliness, and if the wind ever shifts, if you feel it change, know that it's me telling you to get up and walk forward. You're not done yet. Always." Ethan. Lucas sat beside her in silence. No need to speak. The hospital machines beeped softly in the background, like the rhythm of memory returning. Meanwhile, across town, Nora stood by the pine tree in Marley's backyard. Snow had begun falling again. Light and quiet, Sunny sat beside her, ears perked, tail resting still. Nora held a new star in her mittened hands, a small one made of silver paper and string. She hung it low where the others could see. That night she didn't flinch in her sleep. For the first time since her father left, there were no nightmares, no wolves, no cold hands pulling blankets away. She slept curled beside Sunny, the golden pup, now growing fast, his warm breath a steady rhythm against her cheek. In the morning, the letter Ethan wrote to Nora was framed and placed on the bookshelf beside a photo of the three of them, Ethan, Emily, and Nora, beneath the tree, the sun bright behind them. Greg Holloway was transferred out of town within days, his charges forwarded to the state. He never got to speak to Nora again. He never saw Emily's face when she finally stepped outside, the wind brushing her cheeks like a quiet benediction. And in the small town of Willow Ridge, the people who mattered had begun to understand. The strongest voices didn't always shout. Sometimes they waited, sometimes they whispered, and sometimes they came from a 7-year-old girl and her golden dog beneath a pine tree full of stars. Willow Ridge thawed slowly, as if afraid to believe winter was truly over. The last of the snow lingered in shaded corners, crusting the edges of rooftops, and sleeping under trees, but crocuses had begun to bloom along the fence lines, their purple and yellow heads pressing up through the frost. The town, like the earth, was learning how to breathe again. The yellow house at the edge of Oak Lane had changed too. The old porch swing was freshly painted white, swaying gently, even when no one sat in it. The flower beds, once neglected, were now lined with baby tulips planted carefully by small hands, and a woman who still moved slowly from the hospital's long winter. The laughter that echoed from inside wasn't loud, but it was genuine. Emily Jensen was standing in the living room, her laptop balanced on a small desk by the window. She wore a soft blue sweater and thick socks, her auburn hair cut shorter now, a decision she made after the hospital, as if shedding weight she no longer needed. She had begun teaching art remotely, through a virtual learning program, working with children from across the state. Her voice, though quiet, carried warmth and calm through the screen. A new strength had taken root in her, not loud, not dramatic, but grounded. She had known heartbreak, but now she knew how to heal. Too, at her feet, Sonny was stretched out, chin resting on his paws, eyes half closed in contentment. He had grown ably over the past months, his coat now a rich golden hue, almost glowing in the afternoon light. His tail thumped gently every time Nora entered the room, which was often because she rarely left his side. Nora Jensen, now 7.5, had returned to school part-time and studied the rest from home. She wore glasses now, round and delicate, and always had a pencil tucked behind her ear. She was still quiet, but it was a different kind of quiet, the kind that came from confidence, not fear. Each morning she walked Sonny around the neighborhood, waving to the mailman, checking the maple tree in the park, the same tree where everything changed now. It had a small wooden sign nailed to its base for the ones who still believe. No one knew who put it there, but no one removed it. Across town, in a modest community center, filled with the aroma of strong coffee and vanilla muffins, Marley Granger stood on a small stage, adjusting the microphone. She wore her best blazer, navy blue, slightly wrinkled at the cuffs, and her curls were pinned back. For once her speech was written on index cards, but she hardly looked at them. The local Journalism Guild was honoring her with the Civic Integrity Award, a modest but meaningful recognition for her investigative work and community impact. The article she wrote, "The True Survivor is the One Who Speaks," had been reprinted in 3 newspapers across Vermont and sparked wider conversations about guardianship laws and child safety protocol in small towns. But when she stood at the podium, she didn't mention any of that. "I didn't rescue a little girl," Marley said, voice steady. "She rescued me from silence, from cynicism, from the belief that stories like hers didn't matter. She reminded me that truth isn't always loud, but it's always worth listening to." There was quiet applause. Nothing thunderous, but a few tears shimmered in the room. Afterward, Marley stepped off the stage and into the arms of Mrs. Dell, who was beaming with the pride of a woman who had once seen an entire town born and rebuilt. "You still owe me pie," Dell said, "for dragging me out in the snow that night. You'll get your pie," Marley replied, smiling. That evening, back at the Jensen home, Emily and Nora stood in the backyard beneath the tall pine tree. It was the same tree Ethan once called the star tree. Its branches had held their paper stars for years. Even through the storms some had faded to pale beige, some were still bright with inked dreams. Nora stood holding a small paper lantern, a homemade sky balloon crafted carefully from rice paper and glue. Its interior wired with a tiny flame-safe warmer. Inside the balloon were folded pieces of the star garland they had taken down from the tree, and one special letter there. One Ethan had written her. Sunny sat nearby, tail sweeping softly over the grass. You ready? Emily asked. Nora nodded. They lit the warmer, and the balloon began to expand, lifting slowly in the cool twilight air as it rose. Nora watched it with wide, wondering eyes. The paper glowed faintly gold against the purpling sky. It drifted higher, carried by a soft breeze, the kind that always whispered just before spring truly arrived. He'd be proud of you, Emily said. Nora didn't speak. She just reached for her mother's hand and held it tightly. Later that night Nora fell asleep beside Sunny once more. The dreams that visited her were soft and full of light, fields of stars, the scent of pine, the sound of boots in the snow, and a voice saying gently, I never really left. In the yellow house at the edge of Willow Ridge, peace had returned, not perfect peace but real, earned, the kind that comes after storms, when the air smells like forgiveness and the past finally lets go. And in the backyard beneath a tree older than any pain they had known, the wind lifted a final faded star, one they hadn't seen in years, and carried it softly into the sky. Final message, a lesson from the story. Sometimes the greatest miracles don't come with trumpets or lightning from the sky. Sometimes they arrive in quiet things, a little girl who dares to speak the truth, a puppy who never leaves her side, a mother who finds her way back through pain, and a neighbor who listens when no one else does. This story isn't just about a child or a dog. It's about what God places in front of us every single day. Opportunities to protect, to believe, to love deeper than fear. We don't always recognize the miracle when it happens, but later, sometimes years later, we look back and see the hand of God was there all along, in the warmth of a golden light, in the courage of a quiet voice, in the moment the wind changes. So if you've watched until now, I ask you to pause, whisper a prayer, not just for Nora but for every child who still waits for someone to believe them, for every mother who carries too much, for every silent miracle that's still unfolding in someone's life. May God bless you and keep your heart soft. May He lead you to notice the miracles already around you. If this story touched you, please leave a comment with the word faith. If you still believe in kindness, share this video to remind someone they're not alone. Subscribe to our channel for more true, hope-filled stories, and until next time, may your days be filled with light even in the snow.